Have you ever stopped to wonder why, despite working harder than your parents ever did, you still feel like you're running in place? Imagine waking up every day, showing up on time, doing everything right, following every rule you were taught, and yet somehow the finish line keeps moving further away. What if I told you this isn't an accident? What if the feeling of being stuck, of always being one emergency away from disaster, isn't about your choices at all, but about a system that was designed long before you were born? But if you actually dive into his work, the parts they do and teach in schools, ULL, discover he understood something far more disturbing. He saw that entire populations could be shaped, molded, and trained without ever realizing it was happening. Not through violence or obvious oppression, but through something much quieter, through habits, through expectations, through the steady drip of beliefs about what your life should look like. Smith believed real freedom wasn't just about having choices. It was about understanding the game you're actually playing. And he feared a future where most people would spend their entire lives playing a role they never consciously chose. The role of the perpetual worker, the person who sells time, earns just enough to survive, and spends everything trying to keep up appearances. The person who stays busy, stays tired, and stays confused about why nothing ever changes. Hear what S. Chilling. Smith predicted this would happen because he watched it beginning in his own era. He observed a new class emerging, people who owned nothing except their labor. People who genuinely believed that working harder was the solution. People who thought loyalty and effort would eventually be rewarded. And he warned that in any system built on dependence, your effort isn't what sets you free. Ownership is. This is the truth nobody talks about. This explains why entire generations can work longer hours than ever before and still fall behind. Why millions of people feel trapped, even though redoing exactly what they were told would lead to success. And why so few ever question the one assumption that keeps them locked in place. What if you were deliberately trained to stay poor? Think about it for a moment. What if poverty isn't just something that happens to people who make bad decisions? What if certain behaviors that feel completely normal and natural, are actually keeping you exactly where the system needs you to be? Not because of some shadowy conspiracy, but because the most effective control doesn't announce itself. It just makes certain paths feel safe, reasonable, and inevitable. When a system wants something from you, it doesn't need signs or announcements. It simply rewards specific behaviors while quietly punishing the ones that might set you free. It makes you believe the path in front of you is the one you chose freely, even though it was built generations before you arrived. So how do you know if you're being trained to stay poor? You look for the patterns. And Smith left us clear markers to watch for. The first sign is this: you've been trained to sell your time instead of owning anything. From childhood, you absorb a single narrative. Find a job, work hard, stay loyal, and eventually things will get better. Work becomes the center of everything. But Smith saw the trap in this long before modern employment existed. He understood that when a society depends entirely on labor, it begins shaping people into perfect workers, not free thinkers, not independent builders, just reliable employees. Smith warned about what happens when someone repeats the same narrow task day after day. They don't lose intelligence exactly, but they lose range. They lose the ability to see beyond the role they were assigned. He wrote that a person locked into a single function becomes limited in ways that would not happen naturally. It wasn't an insult, it was a warning about what repetitive labor does to human potential. This is the first marker you being trained. You become excellent at your job while remaining completely ignorant about the one skill that actually matters: understanding money, ownership, and leverage. The system rewards you for being reliable, punctual, and endlessly available. But it never rewards you for asking why your time is the only thing you have to sell. It doesn't reward you for questioning why people above you seem to work less, but earn exponentially more. And it certainly doesn't teach you how ownership works, because ownership is the only real escape route from the bottom. Smith divided society into three groups: workers who sell time, capitalists who own the tools that multiply time, and landlords who own the ground everyone stands on. His fear was straightforward. If you only learn to sell time, you'll always belong to the weakest category. The group with no leverage. The group that can be replaced. The group that never advances, no matter how hard it tries. And here is the brutal truth hiding in plain sight. Your wages aren't designed to rise with your effort. They rise just enough to keep you functional, just enough to make sure you return tomorrow. Modern data proves Smith right. Productivity has exploded over recent decades, while wages have barely moved. The system grows wealthier, but the worker doesn't. Your effort creates value, but someone else captures it. Then comes the trap that seals everything shut. When you sell time, you have less of it every year. You lose the hours you'd need to study, to experiment, to build something of your own. You lose the mental space required to develop skills that lead to ownership. You lose the ability to step back and question the structure around you. A person who's exhausted cannot challenge the system. A person who's constantly busy cannot think strategically. A person who's always behind cannot break free. Smith understood the cruel mathematics of this. People don't stay poor because they lack discipline. They stay poor because they were trained to exchange their most valuable resource, their time, for the smallest possible return. You're taught to work harder, never to own smarter. And once that training takes hold, everything else follows. The second pattern is just as insidious. You've been conditioned to spend money to look rich instead of becoming rich. If the first pattern trains you to depend on wages, this one ensures you give those wages away as quickly as possible. Smith understood this long before advertising agencies existed. He realized humans aren't driven by cold logic when it comes to money. They're driven by something deeper and far more dangerous: the need to be seen. Smith observed that people instinctively admire the wealthy, not because they're virtuous or wise, but simply because their wealth is visible. The clothes, the possessions, the houses. He believed this admiration warps judgment completely. You stop asking whether someone is good and start asking whether they look successful. Once society begins worshiping appearances, the trap snaps shut, because now you feel crushing pressure to perform the same illusion. Today, this has become an entire industry. Economists call it conspicuous consumption, the impulse to buy things not for their utility, but for the signal they broadcast. This is why someone with no savings will spend half their paycheck on designer items. Why someone drowning in debt still buys the newest phone. They're not purchasing comfort, they're purchasing temporary relief from shame. They're buying a brief moment where they don't feel like the poorest person in the room. Modern marketing weaponized this perfectly. People don't buy objects anymore, they buy identities. They buy the version of themselves they desperately hope others will see. The system doesn't need to force consumption. It just convinces you that every purchase fixes something broken inside you, that every product lifts your status, even if only for a fleeting moment. There is a psychological mechanism underneath all this called present. Bias, the human tendency to overvalue immediate rewards while dismissing long-term consequences. The rush of buying something right now feels infinitely stronger than the distant fear of running out of money later. The future version of you becomes someone else's problem, and that future version always pays the price. This is why countless people work all month only to watch their paycheck evaporate within days. It's not stupidity, it's conditioning. A constant diet of shame, comparison, and anxiety makes you vulnerable to anything promising quick relief. Society teaches you that spending is how you stay relevant, how you avoid the quiet humiliation of looking like you're struggling. But the reality is stark. You cannot build wealth if you're buying a costume. You cannot escape poverty if every purchase is designed to hide the fact that you in it. You're not spending to improve your life. You're spending to manage the pain of feeling perpetually behind. The third marker deepens the trap. You re-caught in a wage system specifically designed to keep you dependent. Smith was brutally honest about something modern society refuses to acknowledge. Employers don't need to exploit workers openly. They just need to shape the structure so workers remain dependent. Because once your survival hinges entirely on a paycheck, everything else can be controlled without anyone raising their voice. Smith noted that business owners can easily coordinate their interests. They meet, negotiate, share information, protect their advantages. Workers cannot. They're scattered, exhausted, isolated, and whenever they try organizing, they're labeled troublemakers. Smith identified this imbalance as a fundamental flaw. When one side works together and the other works alone, the outcome is predetermined. This explains why wages rarely rise with productivity. For decades, people have worked more, produced more, contributed more, yet their income barely budges. Meanwhile, profits soar, corporate returns hit records, stock markets double and triple. But the people whose labor creates this value see almost none of it. Then comes the modern refinement: debt. Student loans, car payments, credit cards, mortgages. One debt pushes you toward the next. You stay afloat just enough to continue, but never enough to step back and ask why you're perpetually one emergency away from collapse. Debt transforms workers into hostages, not through force, but by convincing them that borrowing is normal, responsible, even necessary. This creates what economists call the wage trap. Your paycheck covers just enough to survive, but not enough to escape. You cannot quit, cannot take risks, cannot build something independent. Most importantly, you cannot rest long enough to think clearly. When time becomes scarce, strategy disappears. When energy drains completely, ambition fades. An exhausted person will always choose the safest option, even when that option slowly destroys them. The system doesn't need to crush you. It just needs to keep you perpetually busy. The fourth sign reveals an even deeper conditioning. You've been trained to fear the exact risks that make the wealthy wealthier. Smith understood that wealth isn't created by labor alone. It's created by taking calculated, intelligent risks that transform money into more money. He noticed that people who stay poor often aren't lacking opportunity. They're lacking the willingness to take the actions that create opportunity. Smith grasped that profit rewards uncertainty. The person taking the risk earns the return. The person avoiding risk earns the wage. And wages, by design, don't multiply, they drip slowly, barely moving. But here's the tragedy. Most people aren't naturally risk-averse. They're trained into it. From childhood they hear, be careful, play it safe, avoid mistakes at all costs. Wrong answers get punished in school. Failure gets shamed at home. Trying something new gets labeled irresponsible, unless it works perfectly. Slowly, subtly, people learn that stability equals virtue and uncertainty equals danger. Behavioral research shows humans feel the pain of loss far more intensely than the pleasure of gain. Losing $100 hurts more than earning 100 feels good. The system exploits this bias ruthlessly because if you fear losing small amounts, you'll never risk in ways that could transform your life. Meanwhile, the wealthy are raised in completely different environments. They learn money is a tool, that failure is part of strategy. They're protected by cushions and safety nets that make risk survivable. So they take bigger bets, invest aggressively, acquire assets, multiply wealth, not because they're smarter, but because they're not paralyzed by fear. Fear becomes the first inheritance of the poor. Not property, not capital fear itself. A fear that keeps them out of the arenas where real wealth gets created. The fifth marker shows how the game itself is rigged. You're replaying while others write the rules. Smith warned that the greatest danger to any society isn't the worker or the poor. It is the alliance between wealth and power. When those two merge, rules stop being neutral. They become engineered to benefit people who already have more than enough. Modern economists call this rent-seeking, making money not by creating value, but by manipulating the system. Licensing laws that block newcomers. Tax codes so complex, only the wealthy can navigate them. Monopolies that buy competitors before they threaten dominance. Corporations getting bailouts, while individuals get lectures about responsibility. What makes this devastating is that nobody teaches you how any of it actually works. You learn to follow rules, not question who writes them. You learn to pay interest, not earn it. Schools teach obedience. Jobs teach repetition. Society teaches silence. But nobody teaches the mechanics of the system determining your future. The final and most insidious pattern: you've been taught to blame yourself, not the system. Smith understood that a society doesn't need to punish the poor to keep them poor. It only needs to convince them their situation is their own fault. Once that belief takes root, the system no longer needs enforcement. People hold themselves in place. This gets reinforced by the myth of meritocracy, the belief that success is always earned, wealth always deserved, and anyone struggling simply didn't work hard enough. It sounds inspiring. In reality, it's a weapon. But research destroys this myth instantly. Most wealth in developed nations is inherited, not earned. In some places, up to 70% of financial outcomes can be predicted by family wealth at birth, not discipline, intelligence, or choices. Psychologically, shame creates obedience. A person who feels responsible for their suffering doesn't revolt. They explain it away, minimize their pain, stay quiet. They tell themselves they deserve exactly what they have. And that might be the most perfect trap ever designed, convincing you that your cage was your choice all along.